This report is based on publicly available information from reputable outlets as of the 28th of January 2026. Some details may change as new facts emerge. Just yesterday, on the 27th of January 2026, something significant happened in the waters near Iran. According to U.S. Central Command, the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier strike group officially entered the Middle East region, sailing in the Indian Ocean with 3 guided missile destroyers and thousands of American service members. This isn't routine. This is the first U.S. carrier in the region since October, and it comes at a moment when tensions between Washington and Tehran are reaching levels not seen since last June's 12-day war. According to Bloomberg News, President Donald Trump told reporters just days ago that the United States has dispatched what he called a big flotilla toward the Gulf region, adding ominously that we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, oil markets are reacting. CNBC reports that Brent crude hit $64 per barrel for the first time in 2026, while West Texas Intermediate is hovering near $60. These aren't just numbers. They're signals that the world is pricing in risk. But here's what makes this moment different from past crises. Iran is simultaneously facing its worst internal unrest in years, with thousands dead in protests that began in late December. The regime is weakened, its regional proxies decimated, and its nuclear program bombed into submission last June. Yet it still controls the world's most critical oil choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of global oil supply flows every single day. In the next several minutes, we're going to break down exactly what's happening right now. We'll examine the latest military movements, analyze Iran's actual capability to close the strait, explore why this matters for global markets, and most importantly, answer the question everyone's asking: how close are we to another major conflict in the Middle East? This analysis draws from U.S. defense officials, energy market experts, regional intelligence assessments, and the latest reporting from the ground. Let's dive in. According to multiple U.S. defense officials speaking to CBS News and Al Jazeera, the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group crossed into U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility on the 27th of January 2026. The strike group includes the Lincoln itself, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered supercarrier, along with 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr., the USS Spruance, and the USS Michael Murphy. Army recognition reports that a fast attack submarine is also likely operating with the formation, though its identity remains undisclosed for operational security reasons. This deployment represents significant firepower. Military.com notes that the Lincoln carries Carrier Air Wing 9, which includes squadrons flying F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, FA-18E, F Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, E-2D Advanced Hawkeye surveillance aircraft, and MH-60R Seahawk helicopters. The 3 accompanying destroyers are equipped with Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking targets deep inside Iran, along with Aegis combat systems providing air and missile defense. President Trump confirmed the deployment himself on January 23, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One after returning from the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. According to Al Jazeera, Trump stated, "We have a big flotilla going in that direction, and we'll see what happens. I'd rather not see anything happen, but we're watching them very closely." This military buildup follows weeks of escalating rhetoric between Washington and Tehran. On January 21, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi published an opinion article in the Wall Street Journal warning that Iran's powerful armed forces have no qualms about firing back with everything we have if we come under renewed attack. According to Al Jazeera, Iranian General Abolfazl Shekarchi went further, stating that if any hand of aggression is extended toward our leader, we will not only sever that hand, but we will set their world on fire and leave them no safe haven in the region. Trump has responded with his own threats. On January 20, according to Al Jazeera reporting, Trump repeated his warning that Iran would be wiped off the face of this earth if it ever succeeded in assassinating him or if it restarted its nuclear enrichment program. The president told News Nation, I have very firm instructions. Anything happens, they're going to wipe them off the face of this earth. But this military posturing isn't happening in a vacuum. It's occurring against the backdrop of Iran's worst internal crisis in years. According to NPR, protests began on the 28th of December 2025, sparked by the collapse of Iran's rial currency and devastating economic conditions. Iranian state media reported that 3,117 people died in the unrest, including 2,427 civilians and members of security forces, though these figures have not been independently verified by international observers. CSIS analysis notes that by the 8th of January 2026, tens of thousands of Iranians representing diverse social and economic backgrounds poured into the streets demanding an end to the Islamic Republic, with some calling for a return of the monarchy. The protests were among the largest since the 2022 Women, Life, Freedom uprising. Trump initially backed the protesters. According to NPR, on January 2, he wrote on his Truth Social platform warning Iran that if it violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States would come to their rescue, adding, "We are locked and loaded and ready to go." However, by mid-January, according to CSIS, Trump appeared to back away from immediate military action, telling reporters he'd been informed by very important sources in Tehran that the killing has stopped. The protests have since been largely suppressed under heavy security crackdowns, according to Chatham House analysis. A heavy police presence and deadly responses appear to have pushed demonstrations from the streets, at least temporarily, but the underlying conditions remain unchanged. Al Jazeera reports that inflation peaked at over 42% last year, the rial's value has nosedived, and chronic water shortages and electricity outages make life increasingly difficult for average Iranians. This brings us to the critical question. In this moment of maximum pressure, both internal and external, what are Iran's options? And more specifically, could Tehran actually close the Strait of Hormuz? The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the open ocean. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration cited by WION News, approximately 21 million barrels of oil per day pass through this choke point. That's 20% of total global liquid petroleum consumption. If Iran could genuinely close it, the impact would be immediate and catastrophic for the global economy. Iran has threatened to close the strait countless times over decades. Most recently, during the June 2025 war with Israel, the Congressional Research Service reports that Iran's parliament considered voting to close it, but consideration and capability are two different things. According to Daniel E. Mouton, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council who served on the National Security Council as Director for Defense Policy in the Middle East, here's the crucial distinction. Iran has the capacity to disrupt shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, but in the face of a determined U.S. response, Iran is not capable of completely closing the strait. Notice those words carefully. Disrupt versus close. That difference is everything. So what capabilities does Iran actually possess, according to U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency assessments cited by the Congressional Research Service? Iran possesses approximately 5,000 to 6,000 naval mines. These include limpet mines that attach directly to ship hulls, moored mines that float under the surface and detonate on contact, and bottom mines that sit on the seafloor and explode when detecting ships nearby. The Atlantic Council reports that Iran operates roughly 25 submarines, including 3 Russian Kilo-class vessels and around 23 domestically produced Ghadir-class mini-submarines. According to Euronews military analysis from 2025, the 3 Tarek-class submarines can each carry 24 mines through their torpedo tubes and are based at Bandar Abbas, right on the strait. The Ghadir-class mini-submarines are specifically designed for shallow Persian Gulf waters. Iran also fields a coastal defense network with anti-ship missiles covering the entire strait. According to multiple expert assessments, these include Khalij Fars ballistic missiles with a 300-kilometer range designed specifically to hit ships, Hormuz 1 and Hormuz 2 missiles with active and passive radar seekers, and C-802 Noor cruise missiles with a 120-kilometer range. Additionally, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates what experts call asymmetric capabilities, hundreds of fast attack craft, small, heavily armed speedboats, and naval drones. Euronews reported that Iran received 2,640 missile and drone systems in August 2024, though it's unclear how many survived Israel's strikes last June. Here's what's critical to understand. Iran's military isn't designed to compete with global naval powers in open ocean warfare. According to Euronews analysis, Iran's navy ranks 37th out of 145 naval forces worldwide in Global Firepower's 2024 assessment, but it's specifically designed for one mission, controlling the Strait of Hormuz. The geography favors Iran. The strait is only 21 miles wide, and the recognized shipping lanes are even narrower. According to the Atlantic Council, the traffic separation scheme is just 3 kilometers, or about 1.86 miles, wide in each direction. Iran's main naval base sits directly on the north coast. Everything happens in Iran's backyard, within minutes of their bases. Historical precedent shows Iran has tried this before. During the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988, Iran mined the strait, prompting U.S. military action known as Operation Earnest Will. In July 1987, the tanker Bridgeton struck an Iranian mine while under U.S. escort. The U.S. responded by deploying over 30 warships, including minesweepers, mine warfare helicopters, and escort vessels. In October 1987, U.S. Special Forces captured an Iranian ship actively laying mines, and in April 1988, Operation Praying Mantis saw the U.S. destroy Iranian platforms and vessels in retaliation for mining operations. According to the Atlantic Council, that operation demonstrated that a considerable deployment of military and naval capability and a willingness to strike Iran make it feasible to reopen the Strait of Hormuz against a determined effort to disrupt traffic. Crucially, the Congressional Research Service notes that the strait has never been completely closed, even during the height of the tanker war. But how would Iran attempt closure today if it chose to? According to Middle East Institute and Atlantic Council analysis, any serious attempt would involve coordinated, multi-layered operations. First, immediate deployment of naval mines via submarines. The Congressional Research Service notes that Iran's 3 Tariq-class submarines can each carry 24 mines, and immediate deployment could occur via Iran's submarine fleet. Even a single mine-laying sortie could disrupt shipping for days. Second, anti-ship missile strikes from coastal batteries. Commercial tankers are unarmed and unarmored. According to Atlantic Council analysis, Iran's coastal defense network with missiles could easily damage these vessels. A single successful strike could create physical obstruction in the narrow channel and trigger psychological deterrent effects on other ship captains. Third, swarm attacks by fast attack craft. The IRGC's hundreds of small boats could launch close-range attacks, plant additional mines, and critically, prevent minesweeping operations. The Middle East Institute warns that unless minesweeping is protected from continuous harassment of shore batteries and midget submarines, the strait could remain closed indefinitely. Fourth, and this is the aspect many analysts miss, economic warfare through fear. According to Atlantic Council analysis, even the threat of Iranian mines has the potential to halt commercial traffic within days. Why? Because war risk insurance premiums would skyrocket. Ship captains would refuse transit even with insurance. Shipping companies would order diversions around Africa rather than risk the Persian Gulf. Control risks analysis emphasized that severe disruption to containerized and bulk shipping would dramatically impact the supply of day-to-day consumer goods and food. This means Iran could achieve economic closure without complete physical closure. So, could Iran actually do it? The expert consensus is nuanced. According to the Atlantic Council's Mouton, it would be nearly impossible for Iran to fully block all shipping traffic into and out of the Strait of Hormuz on its own with its current capabilities. The strait is wide enough that even though the recognized shipping lanes pass near Iranian waters, there are other navigable paths. More importantly, any Iranian attempt would face immediate and overwhelming U.S. military response. The National Security Journal concludes that the decisive U.S. victory in Operation Praying Mantis during the 1980s tanker war demonstrates that any Iranian attempt to mine or close the strait would be met with a swift and problem-solves overwhelming military response. But here's where the timeline question gets complicated. According to Atlantic Council analysis, even the threat of Iranian mines could halt commercial traffic within days. Insurance markets would react immediately. Ship captains would divert. Oil prices would surge. Special Eurasia notes that approximately 20% of the world's oil is transported through the strait, which makes the stability of shipments critically important for the global oil market. The actual mine clearance operation would take longer. The Washington Institute's analysis notes that a NATO task force of 12 ships managed to clear an Iraqi minefield at a rate of just 1.18 mines per day under ideal conditions. If Iran deployed even 100 to 200 mines, clearance could realistically take weeks or even months, particularly if Iran continued harassment operations. The Congressional Research Service notes that such an effort would likely take some time, days, weeks, or perhaps months, particularly if a large number of Iranian mines needed to be cleared from the Gulf. But critically, the timeline depends on how quickly the U.S. neutralizes Iranian harassment capabilities and whether Iran can continue laying new mines. Based on the Atlantic Council's analysis of Operation Earnest Will and current U.S. capabilities, here's what a realistic U.S. response would look like. In the first week, the U.S. Fifth Fleet, already in Bahrain, would begin escort operations. An additional carrier strike group would arrive if not already present. We're now seeing exactly that happen with the Abraham Lincoln's arrival. Mine countermeasure vessels would deploy, and special operations forces would target Iranian mine-laying vessels. By the second month, we'd see systematic degradation of Iranian capabilities, strikes on coastal missile batteries, destruction of fast attack craft bases, targeting of naval installations, and continuing mine clearance operations. But here's the reality check from oilprice.com's January coverage. Even after the U.S. declares the strait cleared, insurance companies would remain cautious. Premiums would stay elevated for months. Ship operators would demand additional security, slowing transit times. Some vessels would continue avoiding the area until absolute certainty returns. During the 1987 to 1988 period, U.S. operations continued for over a year. Some restrictions on shipping lasted months. Full normalization didn't occur until after the war ended in August 1988, and critically, even during peak tension, some shipping continued under escort. The strait never fully closed. This brings us to the most important question. Why would Iran even attempt something that seems destined to fail and would devastate its own economy? The paradox is stark. According to Control Risks Analysis, an attempted closure of the strait by Iran would be an act of significant economic self-harm, would tarnish relatively good diplomatic relations with the Gulf Arab states, and would provoke a major U.S. military response. The numbers tell the story. Iran exports approximately 1.5 million barrels per day of oil, almost entirely through the strait. According to Control Risks, 90% is exported from Karg Island in the northern Gulf, requiring strait transit. The primary buyer is China, Iran's crucial economic and political partner. Closing the strait would immediately halt Iran's own oil revenue. Moreover, Special Eurasia's analysis notes that Beijing, one of Tehran's major political and economic partners, depends significantly on the oil and gas from the Gulf. China doesn't just buy Iranian oil, it needs Saudi, UAE, Iraqi, and Kuwaiti oil too, all of which transit the strait. Closing it would hurt China as much as Western economies, creating a strategic dilemma for Iran. So under what scenarios would Iran actually do it? According to CSIS analysis, Tehran is unlikely to attempt such action unless in retaliation for a cutoff of Iran's own oil exports, in other words, should it have nothing to lose. Special Eurasia agrees. The possibility of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz depends mainly on the threat that the Israeli and U.S. operations pose to the existence of the Ayatollah regime. The scenarios break down like this. First, regime survival threat. If the U.S. and Israel launched operations threatening regime collapse, Iran's calculation changes. With oil revenue already gone due to blockade or strikes on facilities, and the regime facing overthrow anyway, escalation becomes a last resort deterrent or retaliation. Second, major strikes on nuclear facilities. CSIS specifically identifies this scenario. The most likely catalyst is a military strike by Israel or the United States that disables Iran's Karg Island export facility. If Iran's main oil terminal is destroyed, there's little additional cost to closing the strait, and it becomes viable retaliation. Third, naval blockade. According to CSIS, a naval blockade imposed by U.S. and coalition navies could also potentially throttle or sever Iran's oil exports, thus pushing Tehran to attempt closure of the Strait of Hormuz. If exports are already blocked, closing the strait becomes leverage for negotiations and shows domestic strength. Fourth, full-scale war. If major conflict with the U.S. and Israel is already underway, strait closure becomes one theater in a larger fight. Special Eurasia notes that in this scenario, Iran would probably shut down the Strait of Hormuz, aiming to compel Washington to halt the war or to persuade Asian nations to employ diplomatic means to end the military actions. Here's the crucial insight from multiple analysts. The threat of closure is more valuable than actual closure. According to Special Eurasia, Iran will constantly threaten to close the strait, but it will wait with the closure until the situation with its national security does not become too dangerous. The threat alone influences oil markets, maintains regional leverage, and deters attacks by raising potential costs. There's one more critical data point. According to the Congressional Research Service's latest analysis regarding the June 2025 conflict, Iran does not appear to have taken steps to actively attempt to disrupt the strait's shipping during the June 2025 conflict with Israel. It remains unclear whether Iran was unwilling or unable to do so. Think about that. During a major 12-day war with the U.S. and Israel last June, Iran did not attempt strait closure. This suggests several possibilities. Iran deemed the costs too high even during active conflict. Chinese or regional pressure prevented it. Iran's capabilities were insufficient without risking immediate defeat. Or U.S. deterrence worked. This brings us back to the current moment. According to Chatham House's analysis published just days ago, Trump's objective is to force Iran into what they call strategic submission. The protests, though largely suppressed, revealed the regime's vulnerability. The June strikes degraded Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Regional allies like Hezbollah have been decimated. The economy is collapsing under sanctions. But Iran still possesses leverage through the strait. Ali Vaez, director of the Iran project at the International Crisis Group, told Al Jazeera that without changes and a deal with the U.S. to lift sanctions, this is not a stable status quo, it's just not tenable. Trump appears to be navigating a complex strategy. According to CNBC's reporting last week, energy analysts noted that market participants were braced for price swings amid heightened geopolitical tensions, but most believe a U.S. military strike is unlikely to materially affect Iranian oil production. Andy Lipow, president of Lipow Oil Associates, told CNBC, "The fear of a closure will cause the price of oil to rise a few dollars per barrel, but it is the complete closure of the strait that can result in a $10 to $20 per barrel spike." Crucially, analysts at Fitch Ratings noted that material interruptions to Iranian oil production would boost prices, although the impact would still be limited given global market oversupply. Kepler estimates the oil market is currently tilting toward oversupply, with roughly 2.5 million barrels per day of excess supply in January and over 3 million barrels per day in February and March. This oversupply situation changes the calculus. CNBC quoted analyst Matthew Smith from Kepler. While Iran can always threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz, they may not want to do so given the complexity of power dynamics in the region and may not have the capability to fully close it given how the U.S. Navy is patrolling the area. So where does this leave us right now? As of the 28th of January 2026, the USS Abraham Lincoln and its strike group are now in the Indian Ocean, confirmed by U.S. Central Command yesterday. Thousands of American service members are positioned within striking distance of Iran. Trump continues to make threats while also signaling openness to negotiations. According to reports from January 22, a senior U.S. official said, the Trump administration is open for business when it comes to negotiations with Iran, adding, if they want to talk and they know our terms, we are open to have a conversation. But what are those terms? According to Al Jazeera's analysis, Trump wants Iran to dismantle its nuclear infrastructure entirely, an option Iran has ruled out. Trump also wants Iran to stop supporting regional militia groups, though Israel has already degraded much of that network through force. Iranian officials have responded with mixed signals. They've said they're no longer enriching uranium at any site in the country, trying to signal openness to potential negotiations. But they've also threatened massive retaliation if attacked, and they've made clear through Foreign Minister Arakchi's Wall Street Journal piece that an all-out confrontation will certainly be ferocious and drag on far longer than the fantasy timelines that Israel and its proxies are trying to peddle to the White House. The probability assessment from multiple expert sources suggests this. For limited U.S. strikes similar to June 2025, the probability of strait closure is very low. For a sustained air campaign, it rises to low to medium probability. For strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure, medium probability. For full-scale war threatening the regime, high probability. And if Iranian oil exports are already blocked, the probability becomes very high. Special Eurasia's comprehensive analysis concludes, although Tehran has the military capabilities to close the Strait of Hormuz, this analysis demonstrates that the possibility of such an event is low to medium. The National Security Journal agrees. While Iran's parliament has voted to close the Strait of Hormuz, the nation's ability to enforce a sustained blockade against the U.S. Navy and its regional allies is highly unlikely. Several unanswered questions remain critical to watch. First, how has Iran's capability changed since June 2025? The Congressional Research Service notes concerns about setbacks to Iran's missile stockpiles and production facilities during last June's strikes. Were mine-laying capabilities also degraded? Current assessments remain partially classified. Second, how would China respond? If Iran closes the strait, blocking Chinese oil imports not just from Iran but from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait, would Beijing pressure Iran to reopen it, support U.S. reopening efforts, or provide Iran with intelligence to sustain closure? This is perhaps the biggest unknown. Third, what are the insurance market breaking points? At what level of threat do insurance companies refuse coverage at any price? When do ship captains collectively refuse transit? These psychological and economic factors could create closure even without successful Iranian military action. Fourth, how quickly can alternative routes absorb volume? Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline can carry about 5 million barrels per day, and UAE has bypass capacity of about 1.6 million barrels per day, according to CSIS. But these are already partially in use, and loading facilities outside the strait are limited. They cannot absorb all 21 million barrels per day that normally transit the strait. The monitoring indicators to watch in coming days include Iranian submarine deployments from Bandar Abbas, mine warfare exercise announcements by Iran, U.S. mine countermeasure ship movements to the Gulf, insurance premium changes for Persian Gulf transits, tanker routing data showing diversions, oil price spikes on Iranian threats, and diplomatic communications between Iran and China regarding oil supplies. As of right now, the most likely scenario remains continued deterrence. U.S. military presence and Iranian self-interest prevent a closure attempt The strait remains open with occasional harassment incidents. This appears to be what most analysts expect. But the situation is inherently unstable. Iran faces crushing economic pressure, internal unrest that could reignite at any moment, and external threats from both the U.S. and Israel. The regime's survival instinct is powerful, but so is its vulnerability. Trump has demonstrated willingness to use force, as seen in June and in his recent capture of Venezuela's president. But he's also shown restraint, backing away from strikes in mid-January after apparently receiving assurances about protesters. The strait remains the ultimate pressure point in this standoff. It's simultaneously Iran's greatest vulnerability, since its own oil exports depend on it, and its most powerful weapon, since closure would shock the global economy. That paradox defines the current moment. Neither side wants to trigger the catastrophic scenario, but both are positioning for it just in case. For now, the strait stays open, oil flows, markets price in a modest risk premium but not catastrophe. The USS Abraham Lincoln sails into position, Iranian submarines remain at their bases, and the world watches to see whether this latest crisis resolves through deterrence, diplomacy, or something far more dangerous. The next few weeks will be critical. Watch for any Iranian naval movements, any changes in U.S. force posture, any shifts in oil prices beyond current levels, and most importantly, any diplomatic openings or the absence thereof. This is a situation that could remain stable for months or escalate dramatically within days. The strait has never fully closed in history, but as multiple experts have noted, that doesn't mean it never will. It just means the costs have always been high enough to prevent it. Until those costs change, or until one side miscalculates, the strait remains open. 21 million barrels per day continue flowing to fuel the global economy. But the military hardware is now in position. The threats have been made. And the world's most critical oil choke point remains, as it has been for decades, the most vulnerable pressure point in global energy security.